Hi, so I'm Harriet Johns from Amberside Advisors, and we are part of the delivery partner group running the BEIS DPS for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I will just share my screen now, where this recording will be updating you on the application process for the BHIVE SQ. So just to start, why have we made changes to the BHIVE SQ? In the original BHIVE DPS guidance, we required the fund to be the lead entity. However, it's become clear that some funds are unable to sign the DPS agreement because they're unable to meet all of the obligations contained within the agreement, including the provision of services. So therefore, we've amended the DPS guidance and to state that the entity providing the services should be the one completing the SQ and acting as the lead entity. And signing the DPS agreement and any call of contract. You'll be receiving this recording alongside a corrigendum notice note, which will go into further detail about what has been changed and also why we have made those changes. So the key changes that have been made is who completes the SQ as the lead entity, which I'll go on to further in the presentation. And additional SQ questions for applicants to outline who will be signing each agreement, the level of information required from subcontractors, some additional questions to make it clearer as to what the obligations are under the DPS agreement, and finally the DPSA itself has been updated to include reference to ISO 27001 and also for GDPR. So registering to the Pro Contract system, which is where we're hosting our DPS, is the same as before. So if you're not yet registered, you can still do so, where you can register with proactis and register an interest in this specific opportunity. And this is where you'll be able to complete the SQ questions. We also have all of the agreements hosted on this site alongside the BHIVE website. And if you've already started an application, then this is where you'll continue with that application to make amends for the changes that we will lay out later on in this presentation. For those who've already started, your draft answers can be found in previous rounds, and the system will save your progress in answering the SQ questions as you go along. So before starting the SQ, the key area that you need to sort of think about is who is going to sign which agreements. So the key one being the DPS agreement, and depending on how you will be approaching the BHIVE DPS, whether you're going to be a single entity, a lead entity with subcontractors, or a group of economic operators, this will depend on who should be the lead entity and who will be signing that DPS agreement. So a single entity would be one where the funding and the services are coming from the same entity for lot one, and then under lot two, we envisage most people will fall under the single entity category if they can provide the asset finance under that one single entity. The lead entity with subcontractors, so this is more akin to a fund and fund manager type relationship. So previously, it would have been the fund being the lead entity, but now we require that the fund manager acts as the lead entity and completes the SQ, as they will be the ones that will be providing the services and able to meet the obligations under the DPSA. So before starting your submission, you should identify that which entity is able to meet those obligations and then therefore sign the DPSA, and it is that entity that should be completing the SQ as the lead entity. So then the other contracts that are involved in lot one are the call-off contract, which would be signed either by the single entity or again by that lead entity. And then the shareholders agreement, which would be signed again by the single entity or a lead entity if the funding and the services are in one as one person, or as a named subcontractor providing the funding. I'll go into more detail as to what questions need to be answered by the various parties in due course. So yeah, moving on to who completes which sections of the SQ. The standard SQ should be completed by either the single entity or that lead entity identified. And then if there are going to be any subcontractors, so a subcontractor would be the entity providing the funding. If that is a separate entity, we'll need to complete questions under the provider 2 and 3 responses. And if you are approaching the BEIS DPS as a group of economic operators, then all the additional entities within the group of economic operators will need to complete the provider 2 and 3 responses. So provider 2 and 3 is based on how many additional entities there are. So if you only have one additional entity or one subcontractor, then you only need to complete one of those provider responses. For the lot specific questions, these can be completed as a composite response on behalf of all of the entities that are named in the SQ. So the standard SQ has these different sections. So the first section is on the potential supplier information. Then section 1.2 is a bidding model, and 1.3 is a declaration that says that all of the information provided in the SQ is correct. Section 2 goes through the mandatory and discretionary exclusionary grounds. Section 3 is some questions on modern slavery. 4 is questions on insurance, and these align with the requirements under the DPSA for insurance for this DPS. Again, the cyber essentials questions align with the requirements under the DPSA. The supplier code of conduct is section 6, and then section 7 is a section on financial standing, which I'll go into in more detail. Section 8 is questions around GDPR and data protection legislation. Section 9 is for you to identify which lot you are applying for. So under this DPS, there are 2 lots available. Lot 1 is for equity finance, and lot 2 is for asset finance. And finally, section 10 is for the DPSA. So that is for you to accept the terms of the DPSA agreement and let us know who would be signing this DPS agreement should you be accepted onto the DPS. So who should complete which sections? So the lead entity should be answering all of the sections that I've just identified there, and those should be completed within the main SQ. And then each subcontractor should complete sections 1, 2, and 7 using the provider 2 and 3 responses. And then the group of economic operators should complete sections 1 to 8, again using the provider 2 and 3 responses. So a bit more detail on the financial standing information requirements. For this DPS, we require a Dun & Bradstreet risk indicator score of 2 or lower. We require you to submit your credit report, and then if a guarantor is being relied upon, then there are some additional fields that need to be completed for to give information about that guarantor. If these requirements are not met, or there is no Dun & Bradstreet score available or no guarantor available to provide these, then you are able to provide the 2 most recent years of audited accounts for us to assess the financial risk. More detail can be found in the funder provider guidance that details exactly what we require under this section. And we will assess each named entity in the SQ, so that's subcontractors and the other entities in the group of economic operators. So the lot specific questions, as I outlined earlier, these should be completed as a composite response. So for the equity finance, these would be detailing your experience in energy infrastructure projects, your ability to provide the services and the amount and source of the capital. For asset finance, these again are detailing the experience in the industry, and then also the availability of public sector lease documentation and the ability to take on residual value. So all of those are within the SQ, and the it details in there how much sort of response you should give, and the sort of examples that we're looking for those. So the SQ responses, some of them require evidence to be submitted, whereas others are self-certified. And the contracting authority can request the provider's SQ response and ask for any updates to these to reconfirm information. So this includes anything that was self-certified, and other information can be requested as well once we move to the call for competition stage of the DPS. So that was just a short presentation on the changes that have been made. I will now move on to the pro contract system to show you how this looks on the actual system. So once you log into the pro contract system, if you've already registered, this is a similar screen to what you will see when you go onto the system. If you need to register, then it will take you through that process before that. But once you get to the main BEIS DPS, this is the screen that you will see. Once you're ready to start a response, you can start this down here in this corner here. And then once you are through to the system, that is where you will be able to start answering the question sets. Since the last webinar, the updates to the DPS have been outlined here, and the updated documentation is provided in this section here, as well as the updated DPSA agreement. Looking at the question sets in more detail, this standard selection questionnaire here is the main SQ that needs to be answered by the lead entity. So that is the entity that is signing the dynamic purchasing systems agreement, and is the entity providing the services under lot 1. So if I just click into this, it outlines the key sections that I went through earlier. So to begin with, we just have some information about the lead entity. And then section 1.2 is the bidding model. So this is where you would outline whether you're bidding as a group of economic operators, a single entity, or relying on subcontractors. There is an additional form to outline the details of your subcontractors within question 1.2.5 for you to outline those subcontractor points. And then 1.3 is the declaration that all of the information that you have provided within this SQ is correct and complete. So where you see this icon, that will mean there's an attachment that you either need to complete or provides you with further information on that specific question. Part 2 is exclusionary grounds. So the list of these grounds can be found on the website below. These are standard questions that are included in all government procurement exercises. So these are just for you to outline whether any of these apply to you, and the same for the grounds for discretionary exclusion. Modern slavery, questions here, insurance, cyber essentials, and ISO 27001. The supplier code of conduct, again, this will take you to a government website that outlines the supplier code of conduct, which is for procurement exercises again, and you'll just need to certify that you comply with that. Under the financial standing section, this is where you'll provide your Dun & Bradstreet indicator report. Within the question, it allows you to upload attachments, so that's where you would attach your report. And then if you're relying on a guarantor, this is the additional information, which is just a replication of the initial questions to outline the key information about your guarantor. The data protection and legislation questions are here. And then for the lots, that's where you'll indicate which lots you're bidding for, and for the DPSA, that you accept the terms and agree to the schedules. So that is the main SQ. And then provider 2 and 3, these are the ones that need to be completed if you are relying on subcontractors or you are a part of a group of economic operators. So these again run through the same sort of questions to The main SQ, for subcontractors, you will need to complete parts 1 and parts 2 and then part 7. But if you are a group of economic operators, you will need to complete all of the questions that are included in this provider 2 and 3 section. For the lot specific questions, we have under equity finance these experience questions, and then we finally have an additional question which is new since the last webinar, which basically gets you to outline the commercial structure and dictate which entities that you have named within the SQ that will be signing the various different agreements, just so it's clear who will be signing the DPSA, the shareholders agreement and such. So all of these, just require you to provide evidence of your experience in the industry and your experience of providing the services for the DPSA. So for lot 2, the asset finance questions, again, these are just detailing your experience and the public sector lease requirements. So you only need to answer these depending on which lot you are applying for. And the provider 2 and 3, the system will let you continue. If you are just applying as a single entity, it will let you continue with the SQ and submit it without responding to these. So you only need to respond to those if they are applicable to your application. The rest of the information can be found in the provider guidance that is available on the BEIS website. There is also additional information included on the Pro Contract website within our BEIS DPS. And if you have any additional questions, or if you're unsure as to how to complete the SQ, if you get in contact with us via either through the system or on the BEIS email address, then we'll be able to walk you through which questions you need to answer and what applies under your specific circumstance.